They say you know when something's wrong. You just feel it. Like a low hum vibrating beneath your skin, a constant nagging feeling that sits in your chest and refuses to let you breathe easy. That's how it started with Jason. A hum. "Working late again, Maya?" he asked, his voice carrying from the kitchen. I winced. That fake concern dripped like poison. I glanced up from my laptop, willing my face to relax, to hide the simmering rage. "Big deadline, Jace," I said, trying to sound casual. He smirked, pouring himself a glass of that damn Cabernet he knew I hated. "You gotta take it easy, May. Life isn't all about work, you know." The hypocrisy choked me. If he only knew the double life I was living. My name is Maya, and for the last 6 months, my existence has been a tightrope walk, balancing on the knife edge of normalcy while secretly unraveling my husband's web of lies. It's not glamorous, not exciting. It's soul-crushing, exhausting, and filled with a fear that threatens to consume me. It started subtly. Late-night meetings that never made sense. Hushed phone calls he took on the patio, always out of earshot. Charges on our credit card for restaurants I'd never heard of, let alone visited. And then, the faint scent of perfume clinging to his shirts, a floral sweetness that definitely wasn't mine. At first, I dismissed it. Stress, I told myself. A demanding project at work. Maybe I was just being paranoid. But the seed of doubt had been planted, and it grew with terrifying speed. Then I found the receipt, tucked away in his briefcase, crumpled and hidden beneath a stack of contracts. A down payment, a significant down payment, on a car, not just any car, a sleek black Jaguar, a car that screamed wealth and power, a car that wasn't for me. I confronted him carefully, tentatively. "Honey, what's this charge?" I asked, holding the receipt up, my hand trembling only slightly. Jason, ever the smooth talker, waved it off. "Work perk, babe," he said with that infuriating grin. "You know how my clients like to celebrate." I wanted to believe him. God, I wanted to believe him, but his eyes darted away, refusing to meet mine. And in that moment, I knew. The truth hit me like a punch to the gut, stealing my breath and leaving me reeling. He was cheating, and he was using our money to do it. So I started paying attention. I became a detective in my own home, meticulously gathering evidence, connecting the dots, each revelation twisting the knife deeper. It didn't take long to uncover the full picture. Jason wasn't just having an affair. He was funding a whole new life for her. Her name was Isabella. His client. Expensive dinners at that damn Italian restaurant, the one with the insane wine list. Shopping sprees at boutiques that cost more than our mortgage. And the car. The goddamn Jaguar. He planned to give it to her as an anniversary gift. Their anniversary. The audacity of it all was breathtaking. Here I was, working my ass off to secure our future, sacrificing my own dreams, while he was draining our accounts to impress a woman who probably thought fidelity was a type of insurance. But I didn't confront him. Not yet. That night, as Jason sprawled on the couch, flipping through channels, oblivious, I opened my laptop, and I started to plan fraud reporting procedures, legal options, repossession companies. Every keystroke was fueled by a cold, burning rage. Jason thought he was clever. He thought he was getting away with it, but he underestimated me. He forgot that I was the one who handled the finances. I knew where every penny went. I knew how to unravel his tangled web of lies. If he wanted to play dirty, I was ready to clean house. For the next few weeks, I played my part. I was the loving wife. I laughed at his stupid jokes. I asked about his business trips. I even managed to stomach the faint whiff of Isabella's sickeningly sweet perfume on his clothes. But behind the scenes, I was building my case. Meticulously, carefully, piece by piece. The first step was the fraud report. The Jaguar. Purchased with our joint funds, but the dealership papers only had Jason's name on them. A detail he thought was insignificant. a detail that would be his undoing. I contacted the dealership, pretending to need more information about the transaction. Just clarifying some details for our records, I said, my voice steady, professional. By the time I hung up, I had everything I needed. Dates, amounts, proof that the purchase had been made without my consent. Then came the call to the bank. I believe my account has been compromised, I told the fraud department, my voice tight with feigned anxiety. There's a transaction I didn't authorize, and it's a significant amount. They flagged the account, opened an investigation. Every step I took tightened the noose around Jason's neck. Meanwhile, I kept watching him. Every time he smirked at his phone, every time he whispered into it like a teenager sneaking a forbidden call, I took mental notes. I even managed to catch a glimpse of a text from Isabella. Can't wait to see the surprise you promised. The surprise. The car. The thought made my stomach churn, but it also fueled my resolve. Jason thought he was the master manipulator, but he'd forgotten one crucial thing. I knew how to wait. The anniversary plans fell into place almost too perfectly. Jason suggested a fancy dinner, the same damn Italian restaurant he loved to frequent with Isabella. I want to treat you right, May, he said, flashing a smile that once made my heart flutter. Now, it just made my skin crawl. Sounds wonderful, I replied, masking my contempt with a sweet smile. I knew what he was doing, using the dinner as a cover to present Isabella with the car afterward, but I wasn't about to let him get away with it. That night, after Jason left for another client meeting, I finalized the details with the fraud investigator. The car's purchase was flagged. The repossession team was scheduled. Everything was set to unfold just as Jason thought he was winning. As I closed my laptop, I felt a strange sense of calm. For weeks, I'd been carrying the weight of his betrayal, pretending not to notice the lies piling up around me. But now, the power had shifted. Jason had no idea his world was about to collapse. The night of our anniversary dinner arrived, and Jason was in his element. He strolled into the house wearing a sharp suit, holding a bouquet of red roses and a bottle of Dom Perignon. "Happy anniversary, babe," he said, leaning in to kiss my cheek. "Happy anniversary," I replied, my voice steady, my smile practiced. If he noticed the coolness in my demeanor, he didn't show it. He was too busy gloating. At the restaurant, Jason spared no expense. He ordered the finest wine, the most extravagant dishes. He even arranged for a pianist to play our song. It would have been romantic, if I hadn't known the truth. As he sipped his wine, Jason's phone buzzed. His expression lit up when he read the message, though he quickly tried to mask it. "Everything okay?" I asked, feigning curiosity. "Just a work thing," he said, slipping the phone back into his pocket. "Nothing to worry about." I nodded, biting back a smile. I knew exactly what the message said. Isabella was waiting. For her surprise, after dinner, Jason suggested we take a walk. "It's such a beautiful night," he said, slipping his arm around my shoulders. I played along, letting him lead me back to the car. He opened the passenger door for me, like the perfect gentleman, but I could see the excitement in his eyes. He was counting the minutes until he could ditch me and deliver his grand gesture to Isabella. Back at the house, I watched Jason check his watch repeatedly, his impatience barely concealed. "I gotta run out for a bit," he said finally, his tone casual. "Work emergency?" "On our anniversary?" I asked, tilting my head innocently. "It won't take long," he assured me. "Just something I need to handle." I smiled sweetly. "Of course. Don't let me keep you." As he grabbed the keys and headed out the door, I sat back on the couch, my heart pounding. I could imagine the scene unfolding already. Jason pulling up to Isabella's place, handing her the keys, basking in her adoration, until the repossession team arrived. I didn't have to wait long. An hour later, my phone buzzed. A text from Detective Reyes. "Repossession complete." Everything went as planned. I stared at the screen, my hands trembling, a mix of relief and satisfaction washing over me. Jason had no idea yet, but his perfect little charade had just come crashing down. And this time, I wasn't the one left picking up the pieces. When Jason returned later that night, his face was flushed, and his usual swagger was noticeably absent. He slammed the front door harder than necessary, his keys clinking loudly as he tossed them on the counter. "Rough night?" I asked, glancing up from the book I was pretending to read. He shot me a look, but his words were measured. "Just some unexpected complications," he said, pulling at the knot of his tie. "Anything I can help with?" I asked, my voice dripping with faint concern. "No," he snapped, then quickly softening his tone. "I mean, it's fine. Nothing for you to worry about." I bit back a smirk and returned to my book, letting the silence stretch between us. Watching Jason squirm was almost too satisfying, but I wasn't done yet. As he disappeared into the bedroom, muttering something about needing to figure things out, I received another text from Detective Reyes. "Your husband filed a report with the dealership. Claimed the car was taken by mistake. We'll keep you updated." I chuckled softly, imagining Jason's humiliation as he tried to explain the repossession without revealing the fraud. The next morning, I woke to the sound of Jason pacing in the kitchen. He was on the phone, his voice low and tense. "I don't care what it takes," he was saying. "Just fix it. She's furious, and I can't." He stopped abruptly when he noticed me standing in the doorway. "Morning," I said, pouring myself a cup of coffee. He forced a smile. "Morning. Just handling some work stuff." "Sounds stressful," I said, taking a sip of coffee. "Anything I should know about?" "No," he said quickly, his tone clipped. "Nothing you need to worry about." For the rest of the day, Jason was uncharacteristically quiet. He spent hours on his laptop, muttering under his breath, occasionally slamming the lid shut in frustration. I could tell he was trying to salvage the situation, but there was nothing he could do. The fraud report had triggered a full investigation, and the dealership wasn't about to hand the car back without answers. By the evening, Jason's patience had worn thin. "Do you ever feel like the universe is just out to get you?" he asked suddenly, his tone bitter. "Sometimes," I replied, keeping my expression neutral. "But I think the universe has a way of balancing things out, don't you?" He didn't respond, but the look he gave me lingered a little too long, as if he suspected I knew more than I let on. The cracks in Jason's composure grew more obvious by the day. He was short-tempered, distracted, and constantly on the phone, arguing with someone on the other end. I didn't press him. Instead, I watched and waited, silently enjoying the unraveling of his carefully constructed facade. One evening, I overheard a particularly heated call. Jason was pacing in the living room, his voice low but furious. "I told you I'd fix it," he hissed. "Just give me a little more time. It's not my fault these things happen." I could guess who he was talking to. "Isabella!" I leaned against the kitchen counter, pretending to scroll through my phone, though every fiber of my being was focused on his words. "She's overreacting," Jason muttered, clearly trying to calm whoever was on the other end. "You don't need to make this a big deal. I'll sort it out." The call ended abruptly, and Jason threw his phone onto the couch, muttering a string of curses. "Everything okay?" I asked, stepping into the living room with feigned innocence. He looked up, startled, then forced a tight smile. "Yeah, just work stuff. Must be tough," I said, sitting down across from him. "You've been so stressed lately. Are you sure there's nothing I can do to help?" His jaw tightened, but he shook his head. "No, I've got it under control." That night, I received another update from Detective Reyes. "The investigation is moving forward. The dealership has corroborated the fraud report. Your husband's activities are under review." I stared at the message, a mix of relief and anticipation coursing through me. The net was closing in, and Jason had no idea. The next morning, Jason's mood hit a new low. He sat at the kitchen table with his head in his hands, barely touching his coffee. "I don't know what's wrong with people these days," he said, his voice tinged with bitterness. "Everyone's out for themselves." I almost choked on my coffee, but managed to stifle a laugh. "Really? What happened?" He waved his hand dismissively. Just some setbacks. Nothing for you to worry about. Of course, I said sweetly, hiding my smirk behind the rim of my mug. By the end of the week, Jason was visibly unraveling. His confident demeanor was gone, replaced by a man grasping at straws. As he sat in the living room that evening, typing furiously on his laptop, I leaned against the doorway. You know, Jason, I said casually, sometimes people get exactly what they deserve. He froze for a moment, his fingers hovering over the keyboard before turning to look at me. What's that supposed to mean? I shrugged, my expression calm. Just something to think about. The breaking point came on a Saturday evening. Jason had been on edge all day, snapping at everything and everyone. By the time he got a call from Isabella, his carefully maintained mask shattered entirely. I was in the kitchen when his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, cursed under his breath, and walked outside to take the call. Curious, I followed quietly, staying just out of sight by the open window. You don't understand, Jason hissed, his voice frantic. It's not my fault, the dealership's claiming fraud. He paused, clearly interrupted by a furious tirade on the other end. But I didn't, he said, his voice cracking. Do you think I like this any more than you do? Just give me a little more time. I couldn't quite make out Isabella's words, but the tone was unmistakable when he finally hung up. Jason stormed back inside, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the windows. Everything okay? I asked innocently, glancing up from my laptop as he stormed past. Fine, he snapped, disappearing into the bedroom. Moments later, I heard the unmistakable sound of drawers being yanked open and slammed shut. Curious, I peeked into the room and found him frantically rummaging through his closet, throwing clothes and shoes onto the bed. What are you doing? I asked, leaning against the doorframe. Packing, he said shortly. Packing? The first raised an eyebrow. Are you going somewhere? Don't start, Maya, he said, his voice tight. I don't have time for this right now. I crossed my arms, watching as he stuffed random items into a duffel bag. What's going on, Jason? You've been acting strange all week. He froze for a moment, his back to me, before turning around. It's nothing, he said, his tone sharper than usual. Just a work emergency. I need to deal with. I held his gaze, letting the silence stretch uncomfortably long. Finally, I smiled. If you say so. As Jason left with his hastily packed bag, I received a text from Detective Reyes. The investigation is moving fast. Expect more developments soon. I sat on the couch, staring at the door Jason had just walked through, feeling a strange mix of satisfaction and anticipation. He thought he was running to fix things, but the truth was, there was nothing left to fix. By the time he realized it, it would be too late. For the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to relax. The plan was in motion and the pieces were falling into place. All I had to do now was wait. Monday morning, I woke to a string of missed calls and frantic voicemails from Jason. Maya, call me back. It's urgent. Where are you? I need to talk to you now. They're saying fraud, but it's not true. You've got to help me fix this. I deleted each one without hesitation, savoring the quiet triumph of knowing the tables had finally turned. Over coffee, I texted Detective Reyes for an update. His reply was swift. Jason tried to contact the dealership this morning. He's panicking, but the fraud investigation has progressed too far for him to undo anything. I smiled to myself, imagining Jason's face as he realized there was no way out. Around midday, the doorbell rang. When I opened it, Jason stood on the porch, looking disheveled and desperate. His shirt was wrinkled, his tie askew, and his usual arrogance was nowhere to be found. We need to talk, he said, his tone pleading. I crossed my arms, leaning against the doorframe. Talk about what, Jason? The car you bought for your mistress? Or the fraud charges you're facing? His eyes widened, panic flickering across his face. Maya, I can explain. No need, I cut him off. I know everything. The fake business trips, the luxury dinners, The car. You thought I wouldn't notice? But I've known for months. He stumbled over his words, trying to piece together a defense, but I didn't give him the chance. You used our money to fund your lies, I said, my voice steady. You betrayed me, and now you're paying the price. He stepped closer, his hands raised in a gesture of surrender. Maya, please. I messed up, but we can fix this. I'll pay you back. I'll do whatever it takes, I raised an eyebrow. You'll pay me back with what? Your empty promises? Or the love letters from Isabella? The mention of her name made him flinch, and I knew I'd hit a nerve. Before he could respond, I stepped back and gestured to the stack of papers sitting on the entryway table. You can start by signing these, I said. Jason hesitated, glancing at the documents. What is this? Divorce papers, I replied. You've already lost the car, and soon you'll lose access to everything else. Consider this your final chance to walk away with whatever dignity you have left. He stared at me, his jaw tightening. For a moment, I thought he might argue, but then his shoulders sagged in defeat. You don't have to do this, he said weakly. Yes, I do, I said firmly. Because unlike you, I know how to finish what I start. Jason left without another word. As I closed the door behind him, I felt an overwhelming sense of relief. The man who had taken so much from me was finally out of my life. And for the first time in years, I felt free. The house felt eerily quiet after Jason left, but it wasn't the unsettling kind of silence I'd grown used to during our marriage. This was the peaceful kind, the kind that meant freedom. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the signed divorce papers Jason had left reluctantly, his pleas still echoing in my mind. But the weight of his betrayal no longer sat heavy on my shoulders. For the first time in months, I felt in control. Over the next few days, I started putting my life back together, piece by piece. The first step was meeting with my lawyer to finalize the divorce. Clara, ever efficient, was thrilled with how smoothly things were progressing. With the fraud investigation and the financial evidence we've gathered, he doesn't have much leverage, Clara said, flipping through her notes. You'll keep the house, your assets, and any remaining funds he hasn't squandered. And what about the fraud case? I asked, my voice steady but curious. That's moving forward as well, Clara replied. Detective Reyes has ensured that all the pieces are in place. Jason will be facing charges soon, and given the evidence, it's unlikely he'll avoid jail time. I nodded, the news giving me a sense of closure I hadn't realized I needed. While the legal battles moved forward, I focused on reclaiming the space Jason had tried to overshadow. I rearranged the furniture, replaced the old curtains with ones I picked out, and even painted the living room a soft shade of blue. My favorite color. Not his. Anna came over one afternoon to help, armed with paint rollers and a bottle of wine. This place already feels different, she said as we worked. It's like you've taken back the energy he tried to drain from it. That's the goal, I replied with a smile. I want this house to feel like mine, not a reminder of him. I also started reconnecting with friends I'd lost touch with during my marriage. Jason had always insisted on controlling our social life, dictating who we spent time with and when. Now, I was free to make my own choices. One evening, I hosted a small dinner party with Anna and a few close friends. As we laughed and shared stories over a meal I'd cooked myself, I realized how much I'd missed this, being surrounded by people who truly cared about me, not the version of me Jason had tried to shape. The investigation into Jason's fraud continued to make progress. Detective Reyes called me with updates every few days, his tone always professional but tinged with satisfaction. The dealership is cooperating fully, he said during one call. Jason's attempts to cover his tracks only made things worse for him. It's a matter of time before we see this through. I thanked him, feeling a mix of relief and validation. Jason had spent years trying to manipulate me, but in the end, he'd only outsmarted himself. As I hung up the phone, I stood in the middle of my freshly painted living room, taking it all in. The house was quiet, but it no longer felt empty. It felt like home. The weeks after Jason's departure brought a kind of peace I hadn't felt in years. The house, once filled with tension and lies, now felt like a sanctuary. One morning, as I sat on the back porch sipping coffee, I opened my notebook and started jotting down plans for the future. For so long, my life had revolved around keeping Jason happy, balancing his whims, and smoothing over his mistakes. Now, for the first time, I could focus entirely on myself. At the top of the page, I wrote, "Things I've always wanted to do." The list grew quickly. Redecorate the house, travel to Greece, start my own business, spend more time with friends and family. Each item felt like a step toward reclaiming my identity, one that had been overshadowed by Jason's selfishness for too long. I started small, tackling the first item on the list. With Anna's help, I transformed the house into a reflection of my style, warm, inviting, and unapologetically mine. We painted the walls in vibrant colors, replaced the furniture Jason had insisted on, and even turned his old home office into an art studio. "This feels like you," Anna said as we hung a large painting on the living room wall. "It's like the house finally matches the person living in it." I smiled, feeling a surge of pride. It's a work in progress, but it's getting there. The next step was rebuilding my career. During my marriage, Jason had discouraged me from pursuing my professional goals, insisting that his ambitions were more important. Now, I was determined to make up for lost time. I reached out to old colleagues and mentors, explaining my situation and expressing my interest in re-entering the workforce. Their support was overwhelming, and within weeks, I had several promising opportunities lined up. One evening, I received a call from a former boss who offered me a consulting position on a project I was passionate about. "We'd love to have you back," she said warmly. "Thank you," I replied, feeling a sense of validation I hadn't realized I needed. "I'm ready." As I settled into my new routine, I began to notice subtle but significant changes in myself. I was more confident, more decisive, and more willing to take risks. The fear and self-doubt that Jason had instilled in me were fading, replaced by a quiet strength I hadn't known I possessed. One evening, as I sat on the couch with a glass of wine, I looked around the house and smiled. This was my life now, messy, imperfect, and entirely my own. A few weeks later, I received a call from Detective Reyes. "The fraud investigation is officially complete," he said. "Jason has been formally charged, and the case will proceed to court in a few months." The news hit me harder than I expected, not because I felt sorry for Jason, but because it symbolized the final unraveling of the life we'd once shared. "Thank you for everything," I told Reyes, meaning it. Without his guidance, I wasn't sure I would have had the strength to see this through. "Justice takes time," he said simply, "but it's worth it." That evening, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat on the back porch, staring up at the stars. The closure I'd been waiting for was finally within reach. And with it came a strange mix of emotions: relief, satisfaction, and a touch of sadness for the life I thought I'd have. Anna came over the next day, her usual energy filling the house. "You look different," she said, handing me a bag of takeout. "Like a weight's been lifted." "Maybe it has," I replied with a small smile. "Jason's charges are moving forward, and the divorce is almost finalized. It feels like I can finally breathe again." Anna grinned. "You're practically glowing." "What's next?" I gestured to the notebook on the coffee table. "I've been making plans. Travel, work, maybe even a business of my own. I'm finally figuring out what I want, instead of what someone else expects of me." "About time," Anna teased, raising her glass in a toast. "Here's to the next chapter." In the weeks that followed, I started checking more items off my list. I booked a solo trip to Greece, something I'd always dreamed of but never had the freedom to pursue. The thought of exploring ancient ruins and walking along sunlit beaches filled me with a sense of adventure I hadn't felt in years. At the same time, I dove into my consulting work with enthusiasm, reconnecting with the passion and drive that Jason had tried to stifle. Every step forward felt like a declaration. I was no longer defined by the mistakes of my past or the betrayal I'd endured. One afternoon, as I stood in my freshly redecorated living room, I glanced at the framed photo on the mantel. It was a picture of me and Anna from years ago, taken long before Jason had entered my life. Looking at it now, I realized something important. I was still that person. The strong, capable woman who knew how to stand on her own 2 feet. Jason hadn't taken that from me, no matter how hard he tried. And now I was finally ready to move forward, without looking back. The day of Jason's trial arrived, cloaked in a heavy, oppressive atmosphere. The courthouse buzzed with a nervous energy, a palpable tension that clung to the air like static. I hadn't wanted to come. There was a part of me that just wanted to put it all behind me, to forget Jason ever existed. But something compelled me, a need to witness the final act of this painful chapter, to see justice served, not just for myself, but for the woman I was becoming. As I walked through the sterile, echoing hallways, the memories flooded back, the laughter, the promises, the shared dreams that had turned into lies and deceit. The bitterness twisted in my gut, a familiar ache I'd hoped to leave behind. I found Anna waiting for me outside the courtroom, her presence a reassuring anchor in the storm of my emotions. "You okay?" she asked, her eyes searching mine. "As okay as I can be," I replied, forcing a smile. "Just want this to be over." We entered the courtroom, the air thick with anticipation. Jason was already there, seated at the defense table, his usual confidence replaced with a hollow-eyed dread. He looked smaller, diminished. He caught my eye for a fleeting moment, a flicker of something unreadable in his gaze. Guilt? Regret? It was impossible to tell, and honestly, I didn't care. The proceedings began, a slow, methodical unraveling of Jason's carefully constructed lies. Detective Reyes testified, presenting the evidence with calm, unwavering authority. The fraud report, the dealership records, the bank statements, each piece fitting together to paint a damning picture. The prosecution meticulously laid out the case, exposing Jason's calculated scheme to defraud me and use our joint assets for his own selfish gain. As the testimony unfolded, I found myself strangely detached, watching the events as if they were happening to someone else. The details of Jason's betrayal, once so searingly painful, now felt like distant echoes, remnants of a life I no longer recognized. Then came my turn to testify. I walked to the stand, my legs feeling strangely numb. I swore to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, the words echoing in the silent courtroom. The prosecutor began his questioning, gently guiding me through the timeline of events. The subtle clues, the growing suspicions, the discovery of the car, the agonizing realization that the man I loved had been systematically deceiving me. As I spoke, I felt a surge of emotion, a mix of anger, sadness, and a surprising amount of strength. I recounted the pain of betrayal, the humiliation of being lied to, the fear of losing everything I'd worked for. But I also spoke of my resilience, my determination to rebuild my life, my unwavering belief in my own worth. I looked directly at the jury, my voice clear and steady. "I trusted Jason," I said. "I gave him my love, my support, my entire life. And he repaid me with lies and deceit. He stole from me, not just money, but my trust, my happiness, my sense of security. But he didn't break me. He made me stronger. And I'm here today to ensure that he is held accountable for his actions." The courtroom was silent, every eye fixed on me. I could feel Jason's gaze burning into me, but I refused to meet his eyes. I had said my piece. I had told my truth. The cross-examination by Jason's lawyer was brutal, an attempt to discredit my testimony, to portray me as a vengeful, scorned woman. He questioned my motives, my financial acumen, even my character. But I held my ground, answering each question with calm precision, refusing to be intimidated. Finally, the testimony was over. I stepped down from the stand, feeling drained but strangely liberated. The hardest part was done. I had faced Jason. I had told my story, and I had survived. The jury deliberated for what felt like an eternity. Hours stretched into days, each moment filled with agonizing uncertainty. I tried to distract myself, to focus on my work, my friends, my plans for the future. But the trial hung over me like a dark cloud, a constant reminder of the pain I had endured. Finally, the call came. The jury had reached a verdict. I drove to the courthouse, my heart pounding in my chest. Anna was already there, her hand squeezing mine in silent support. We walked into the courtroom, the tension so thick you could cut it with a knife. Jason was there, his face pale and drawn. He looked defeated, resigned to his fate. The judge entered the courtroom, and the room fell silent. He asked the jury foreman if they had reached a verdict. The foreman stood, his voice trembling slightly. "We have, Your Honor," he said. He handed the verdict form to the bailiff, who passed it to the judge. The judge read the form, his expression unreadable. He looked at Jason, then at me, then back at the jury. "In the matter of the state versus Jason Miller," he said, his voice resonating in the silent courtroom, "on the charge of fraud, we the jury find the defendant guilty." A collective gasp filled the courtroom. I felt a wave of relief wash over me, so powerful it almost knocked me off my feet. Justice had been served. Jason was finally going to pay for his crimes. I glanced at Jason. His face was ashen, his eyes filled with a mixture of shock and despair. He looked at me, a plea for understanding in his gaze. But I looked away, my heart unmoved. He had made his choices. He had reaped what he had sown. The judge thanked the jury for their service and dismissed them. The courtroom erupted in a flurry of activity. Reporters swarmed, cameras flashed, and lawyers huddled in hushed conversations. Anna wrapped her arms around me, her voice filled with emotion. "You did it, Maya," she said. "You finally did it." I hugged her back, tears streaming down my face. "We did it," I replied, my voice choked with emotion. As we left the courtroom, I felt a sense of closure. A weight lifted from my shoulders. The trial was over. Jason was guilty. And I was free. The sentencing hearing took place a few weeks later. I wasn't required to attend, but I felt a need to be there, to witness the final chapter of this painful saga. I sat in the courtroom, watching as Jason stood before the judge, his head bowed in shame. His lawyer pleaded for leniency, citing his remorse and his willingness to make restitution. But the judge was unmoved. He spoke of the severity of Jason's crimes, the deliberate nature of his betrayal, the damage he had inflicted on my life. He sentenced Jason to 5 years in prison. As the bailiffs led Jason away, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Relief, of course, that he was finally being held accountable for his actions, but also a flicker of sadness for the man I had once loved, for the life we had once shared. But the sadness was fleeting. It was overshadowed by a sense of hope, a belief in the future, a determination to live my life to the fullest. In the months that followed, I focused on rebuilding my life. I threw myself into my work, excelling in my consulting role and earning the respect of my colleagues. I traveled to Greece, exploring ancient ruins and soaking up the sun on the Aegean Islands. I spent more time with my friends and family, cherishing the bonds that had sustained me through the darkest of times. I even started my own business, a small design firm specializing in sustainable home renovations. It was a passion project, something I had always dreamed of doing, but never had the courage to pursue. With the help of Anna and a few other supportive friends, the business thrived, exceeding my wildest expectations. One evening, as I sat on the back porch of my beautifully renovated home, I looked up at the stars and smiled. I had come a long way since the day I discovered Jason's betrayal. I had faced my fears. I had overcome adversity, and I had emerged stronger, wiser, and more resilient than ever before. I had lost a husband, a life, a dream, But I had gained something even more valuable: myself. I was Maya, and I was finally free. The end.